Now, one of the best things I have about living in temporary accommodation is I get to stay in really cool, quirky places. I really like this one. It's got a garden. It's got look at me in a garden, and I haven't had a garden for a long time. But one of the things that really fascinates me is this thing. This is brand new fence. Look at that. Yeah, I only put up clearly within the last month. It's still got beautifully new fishings on it. You can tell it's brand new, but what it does is it partitions the whole garden. You see, even the pathway that I'm walking up and down, it's actually gone right through it. And there's no gate. Now that gate at the very back, but is an actual public right of way. It's a road. So there's actually there's nothing. It doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever. This is a border, and I'm fascinated by borders. What is its purpose? Why am I not allowed up there? What's going on?
Hi, I'm Ian, human changemaker and founder of Daylight Consulting, the sapient change engine and humanity's first Clarke tech. This show, Daytime, is for the changemakers, and today we're talking all about the psychology of borders. Let's get real.
What are borders? Often we're led to imagine that borders are things that are linked to geography, like mountains, rivers, lakes. The demarcation lines between countries with different cultures, languages and legal systems and geopolitical agendas. But actually there is so much more than that. This quote here, coined by Lord Curzon, who was formerly the British Viceroy to India in sort of the last part of his life in the late 19th century, born in 1859, into real British aristocracy at the time, and this is the sort of heyday, or approaching the heydays of the British Empire. Having graduated from Eton, a phenomenally popular chap, he went on to be the head of the Oxford Union, or Oxford University in the UK, and where he was spotted by Lord Salisbury, a very high, commanding member of the Conservative Party, who took a shine to him and brought him under his sponsorship, so that he could thrive and continue to succeed. He saw his potential. Sadly for Lord Curzon, he was injured in a horse riding accident quite early on in his life, and it led to very severe pain, which was a chronic pain which he had to handle for the rest of his life. And it made him, like so many ailments and disabilities, it made him phenomenally resilient, and it actually gave him lots of unique things that he was a very curious chap, and also incredibly wise, charismatic, and by all accounts fair as well. So this concept that there is a stereotype for white heterosexual men is just as irrelevant as there is for any other type of human being. He, after being made a Lord Privy Councillor, having dined many a time with Lord Salisbury in his home, gained sponsor for that. He was knighted by the Queen at Windsor Castle, and ultimately went on to be the Viceroy for India, which was I think was obviously the largest colony of the British Empire in the latter half of his life. And he made this comment in sort of his closing remarks, a real fascinating comment of truth and wisdom, really, about the nature of borders and their role to play in our world. Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Transcapia, Persia, to many of these breathe only a sense of utter remoteness, a memory of strange vicissitudes, and of a more morbidend romance. Sorry, apologies, my 19th century English is a little rusty. To me, I confess, they are pieces of a chessboard upon which has been played out the game for domination of the world. You see that playing out today on the borders of Europe as well. But borders are so much more than that. You can have physical borders, and you can also have cultural borders. These sorts of these less tangible demarcation lines between people and cultures. Now, so I want to talk a little bit about the impact of borders on our psychology and as a species, and also on our brain. Now, divide and rule tactic, for that, I think I mentioned it last time. The first time divide and rule as a strategy was employed, according to history, was Julius Caesar. Although it wasn't called divide and rule back then, but he noticed that if you could separate people and then pit them against each other, it would weaken them relative to you, and then you would be able to then step in and take charge of one of those two weakened groups. So that really evolved then from Julius Caesar's first application of the strategy to what we understand today to be divide and rule, which is a power and control strategy to gain power through division. It begins with step one, which is to construct a border around something, either physical or intangible. And then once you've done that, you then simulate differences. What do I mean by simulating differences? Let's say you wanted to build if you want to take power in the US, you would then build a wall between the US and its neighbour. You would then tell everyone that everyone on the other side of the wall is evil and everyone on the inside of the wall is good, and that there is a big imminent threat from those people that you've just built the wall between. And slowly over time, their identities will diverge. Now, we understand that humans, if you trace back the geologic record, humans originated in South Africa, in what is today part of Botswana, next to Africa's largest lake. Now, today that region is dry and barren, but 300,000 years ago, when humanity first emerged, it was a very, very robust, flourishing area of grassland, and highly potent for crops and farming and so on. So we seem to have a common ancestry, interestingly, which has phenomenal familiarity from the story of Adam and Eve in religious teachings. There are two types of people when it comes to religion. There's the literalists who believe in the prescribed word of the Bible or the Quran, whatever book you're looking at, and then you have the non-literalists, which are more sort of philosophical, which I would certainly consider myself in that camp, where we accept that there's probably someone who put us here, or we've come about through some means that we aren't aware of. And therefore the Bible and other religions may give us some clues about that, but we don't take it too literally, because we understand that divide and rule tactics throughout centuries, if not millennia, is something that makes these texts, and almost any text really, not really the most credible source of scientific information. So we treat everything with a pinch of salt. But certainly in this case, the common ancestry of humanity originating back in Africa from essentially one tribe appears to be supported by the records. So what happened then? So humans slowly spread out across Africa, and at this time we coexisted with our cousins, the Neanderthals, as well as a number of other types of Homo erectus, one of my favourite ones. But most of them died out quite quickly, particularly after humanity started to emerge from the last ice age about 100,000 years ago, which was where the last records of Neanderthals really seemed to disappear. Neanderthals were biologically indistinctive from ourselves. They could even reproduce with us. Therefore, they wouldn't normally be considered a different species. That nomenclature was applied later. I think in the last 400 years we've coined that term. But effectively, they were Homo sapiens. They were just had lived in another part of, in this case, sort of Eurasia, for a distinct amount of time, perhaps 100,000 years, and therefore their skulls had slightly changed shape, and they adapted to their environments in ways that made them appear in some forms distinctive, but undoubtedly not genetically distinctive whatsoever. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is because they're the same species as us, effectively, but because of this nature of this border between Eurasia and Africa, where humans were all in Africa, there was this us and them mentality, and Neanderthals did not survive the emergence of Homo sapiens from Africa 100,000 years ago. They disappeared very quickly. To me, it seems quite obvious what happened. Homo sapien is actually the only thing that makes us different from the other homos. We're all homos. Is sapien? Homo sapien. It means smart human. Interestingly, a human with sapience. So again, the naming was Neanderthals is not a name at all. The Neanderthal River is I think where the area where most of them were inhabited the last time we found a record of them. So they're named after a place, whereas Homo sapiens are named after what we are, and that again lends to my theory that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are effectively the same species. We just one with sapience and one without. Why I digress. So we talked a little bit about physical borders. Once you've created a physical border, you can create a different language, a different legal system, and then you can also start to simulate differences. Those Neanderthals are bad, they're dumb, they're going to attack us and kill our kids, let's kill them first. And then you start to eradicate aspects of your species that you perhaps don't identify with or you don't want. Another really good example of this, I think I mentioned before, is the LGBTQIA++++, human identity is spectral. So we cannot put our name ourselves on that spectrum. But if you're being attacked as a community and you don't feel safe, that the first rung on the hierarchy of success is to find a place where you're safe, belonging. And if you can't do that, your natural instinct is to huddle for safety amongst people like you. And therefore, what people are doing is they're creating borders around their own identity in order to find people going through what they're going through and some way of empathizing with that. And that's such a shame, because we're all affected by hatred in one way or another. And yet we insist on dividing ourselves up and then saying, well, I'm not affected by hatred, I'm affected by transphobia, or I'm affected by sexism, or I'm affected by racism. Whereas we don't actually, if we all came together and we realised that actually we are human beings, and there is no label more powerful than having 8 billion friends, and we as a species are affected by hatred. There's no such thing as good and bad people. There is just human beings and hatred, and if we were able to do that and come together towards it, I think we would have a much better chance of getting rid of it. Hopefully one day. But for now, we're talking about borders and the impact of them. More recently, the border movements have become less frequent than they were in times of colonialism. And really, I think what's happening on the borders of Europe today is a fight for the final border movements of what will probably be largely demarcated nations for most of the rest of the future, aside from any world wars. And if you've ever played Risk before, you understand how if you are there and you're missing a turn after turn, and as your nemesis take more and more land and approach your borders, it's a phenomenally distressing and frustrating place to be. So I do understand why Vladimir Putin is a patriot, certainly to some types of Russians, if not all of them, given Russia is not permitted to be LGBTQ in Russia. Putin has a definite affinity, certainly towards Russians like him, but he doesn't appear to have an affinity towards all of Russia, which I think is telling, and that's a shame, because he's their leader. But he's not reflecting all of their interests. Nevertheless, I do understand his nervousness that there are now many countries, part of NATO, that now have a direct land border with Russia, and Ukraine was one too many for him to tolerate. And there we are, the psychology of borders manifests. I think the real border today is more incel culture. That is the real threat. We used to look for racists in things like chat rooms and because they don't hang out in Trafalgar Square or Times Square. As for a racist rally, unless you come on from Donald Trump's rallies, they more or less, they tend to remain, they like their anonymity. People who value hatred like anonymity. Therefore, they tend to hang out in places where you wouldn't expect them, such as sort of the chat function of World of Warcraft or any sort of online game, particularly with kids there. And there's all sorts of predatory behaviour in these rooms. And once you're able to radicalise someone who's quite young, then that then builds a sustaining culture of hatred, and that explains the rise of the far right, who now control for the first time in history a major European economy in Italy. So I wanted just to call out what's happening here, because a lot of adults, or certain types of adults anyway, are unaware of what happens online, and yet this thing that is hatred is spreading rapidly. If we look at to the ideology, these are mostly younger white heterosexual men, mostly quite sexist, definitely xenophobic, if not outright racist. And potentially anti-women as well. The thing about their culture is that it looks the same in every country. Whether it's the English Defence League in the UK or it's the far right or the alt right in the US. You really couldn't distinguish it. They often will carry flags of their nation, but there's nothing there that says that they are patriots in any way, shape, or form. You just have to look at the riots at Capitol Hill from the 9th of January 2021 to understand that there is nothing patriotic about hatred. But they want something more. They want to destroy the world and everything that's ever been created that's positive within it. Their perceptions are inverted, which we spoke about on another episode. And over time, that then infiltrates and infects other organisations and institutions. A bit like colonialism. They're really colonising new borders and new territories as they go. And I use that word quite purposefully. This is a threat that will continue to grow until someone does something to stop it.
Hi, yes, I'm Mary. I've got a wonky nose and I've been affected by hatred. So instead of teaming up with every other human who's been affected by hatred, I'd like to join the Marys with Wonky Nose Anti-Hatred Club. It's just me at the moment.